Welcome to Positive Perspectives, a podcast dedicated to sharing powerful stories that presents opportunities to grow from lived experiences. In each episode, we speak to expert guests who bring thought-provoking topics, meaningful lessons, or stories that spark transformation and deeper understanding. My guest today is founder and CEO Jannett Morgan, a teacher, trainer, consultant, and executive coach, supporting organisations to empower and promote talent of individuals from marginalised and underrepresented groups. Jannett's ongoing commitment to professional development and creative approach is the inspiration for developing solutions that inspire and transform. Hi, Jannett, welcome. Welcome to Positive Perspectives.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Delighted.
Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and what you're going to be sharing tonight?
Well, I guess outside of the professional space, I'm a mother, a sister, a daughter, community auntie, real auntie, advocate, community person, do a lot in whatever spare time I have to support the community. But professionally, I say that I like to help people lead in spaces that weren't designed with them in mind. And that involves delivering leadership development courses. I focus from an inclusive perspective on intersectional groups. And for me, that is primarily the intersection of race and neurodivergence, but also looking at inclusive leadership programs for people from global majority backgrounds.
Wow, thank you. So we're discussing a variety, a range of topics that really, under the leadership banner, also includes that intersection between equity, if you like, and developing skills.
Absolutely. And I do emphasize the leadership part of it because often when we start having conversations around equity or equality or inclusion, we seem to slip away from leadership and what's happening at the top of the organization. And for me, you can't have equity without having effective and good leadership. So my focus is always on the leadership. And if we get that bit right, then the equity should come with it.
Thank you, Jannett. It'd be great to hear your story.
Wow, there are many stories. Particular one that comes to mind, and I've been thinking about it recently because I've just had a book launch and we may get back to that shortly. But really thinking about where this all started for me, which is over 2 decades ago. And I was just thinking about JM Learning and Skills and how that all began. And it began almost with a not beginning because I had agreed to go into partnership with a colleague of mine. We were both working in a college at the time, and we'd agreed to leave our jobs and go into business together. And there we were as dyslexia tutors, and they were the more senior person than me. So they had the experience, the technical experience. I was a bit older, so I had the life experience as well as the training. And it was just so exciting thinking about the fact that as two women, we were going to start this business. I can remember the business cards that we had designed, and that we'd had a fridge magnet that sat on my fridge for a long time. We designed the website and what it would look like. We thought about our clients, how that was all going to work. We were going to change the world, as of course you are. And then right at the 11th hour, they turned around and said, that's it. I don't want to go forward with this business anymore. Mic drop moment.
Wow. How did you feel?
Shocked, of course. Confused, actually. There hadn't been any animus between us, no arguments, no concerns that had come up. So I think it was more confusion than anything else. And I wanted to really understand what's happened. Can I support with anything? What can I do? But it was a flat no. There was no explanation. There was no meeting of the minds. Let's think about a dignified parting of the ways. I mean, I guess it was dignified because they told me, and we sat down and had a very civilized coffee to speak about it. And I went through the motions because it was just still really confusing to me. And then we went our separate ways. So there I was, left with a dream that was supposed to happen that all of a sudden wasn't going to happen. So I think that was the hardest thing for me at the time, just not knowing why.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, one of the lessons I've learned is that you might not get that why. But at the time, it was really, really confusing. We told people all the plans were in place. This was a moving train. So to find out all of a sudden that, you know, the stop sign had just been thrown up right in front of me was a really, really difficult thing.
So what did you do then?
Short pause, I think, to just try and gather my thoughts. I've got good people around me. So, you know, I guess I checked in with them just to find out, is it me? You know, is it me? Is it them? What's happening? So I went to my trusted people who, again, couldn't really bring any meaning to it because they weren't sure what's gone on. But I have to say that I'm quite a pragmatic person. So something had to happen as a result of it. I didn't know what was going to happen, but pretty quickly I tend to stay on my toes with things. And I think somewhere in the back of my mind is a just in case way of thinking, perspective, what happens if anything goes wrong. And again, I'm a glass half full person. So I think that kicked in fairly quickly where something has to happen as a result of this. And, you know, the saying, every disappointment is an appointment, comes to mind. You know, I think I got into the eye of the storm and there was a stillness in all of that, even though all of these what ifs were going on around me. There was a stillness around that where it's like, okay, the answer is going to come because something good has to come from this. There must be a reason why we went through all of this, and there was.
So practically what happened?
Well, as I say, there was a parting of the ways, and I have never heard from them again, which again is still strange. It still feels like there's something left undone there, but I came to terms with that quite a long time ago. But you know, you can call it coincidence, serendipity, you can call it manifestation, you can call it intention strategizing, but almost around the same time, and I should just take a step back and say, as part of us setting up the business, there are professional directories around dyslexia, as it mainly was then, and neurodiversity. And we were both in those directories independently, but also it was going to be a part of the business. And I actually got an email from someone who I didn't know at the time, but it turned out to be one of the top, most respected people in the neurodiversity space. And this was in the workplace. Now, at the time, I was working in education. This was in the workplace. So I didn't really have a lot of experience in the workplace supporting people, but there are a lot of transferable skills. And I was curious. I was curious. They'd reached out, they got my details. Would you be interested in coming and working with us? And that was the beginning of the most amazing apprenticeship and transitioned me into supporting people who are employees, business owners, and working with organizations. And I do that to this day, and it's absolutely amazing.
So there was a breakthrough for you. There was that light at the end of the tunnel, somebody who had an opportunity and thought of you in that respect. So did you leave education and start in the workplace?
It was a transition. So it was a mix of everything. And again, because the idea was we were going to have this partnership, the change was going to be that it would just be me. So then I needed a business, I needed a whole identity, I needed a website, all these things that I hadn't thought about independently. And I needed a brand. And even though I'm a marketing graduate, thinking about it from my own business point of view was not something that I was particularly skilled in. It was very, very different thinking about it theoretically and running a business. So I had to get my act together pretty quickly. I also needed a backup plan and a bit of insurance. And so this was effectively what we might call agency work, associate work. It wasn't full-time work. It wasn't going to pay the bills and do everything. And also I needed to develop my craft. So I carried on working in education. And I should also say that the organization themselves, they worked in higher education in universities. So that also was a breakthrough because it allowed me to get to work with university students, which again was hugely transformational for me in the business. It provided a new insight. There is also that connection between universities and the workplace because I worked in lots of vocational institutions, but also lots of arts institutions as well. So drama schools and art schools. So I got the opportunity not just to be working with dyslexic and neurodivergent adults in classroom spaces. I was in workspaces, and they were very different workspaces. It could be anything from a council to a lab to I've worked where there've been animals on site. I've worked in childcare. So there's been, they're designed not for classrooms, they're designed for work. And that throws up new challenges and new opportunities. And so there was this balance of working in education spaces, but also working in workplaces, all with adults. And it just really kind of stimulated my own creativity, my own thinking, allowed me to slowly develop and build the business, have some setbacks because, there were times when I had to go back into part-time work when the money wasn't coming through. But that part-time work again gave me more insights to, come back out and full-time run my business.
So you had to have a lot of belief in yourself and ability to make this happen. What helped you to maintain that belief in your potential?
Well, I am the daughter. I said I was a daughter. I am the daughter of an amazing woman who's no longer with us, but I learned so many lessons around self-belief, around being unapologetic about who you are, about not taking on board other people's labels of you. So, my background is very humble. I have lots of siblings. I grew up in a single parent household. I was one of those people that, was told that you're not going to make it, you're not going to do well. Free school meals. So all of these intersections with class, ethnicity, race, all of those kinds of things. There was never any poverty of ambition in my household. Education was something that was highly valued, and I was a good student. And as someone who's not neurodivergent, I knew how to make the school system work for me. So a lot of the insights came later when I was seeing people, when I went to university, who were struggling because of dyslexia and the way of teaching not working for them. That was something I didn't learn until much later. And then I had to learn again when one of my own children turned out to be neurodivergent. So as a child, I knew what it took to lead in spaces that weren't designed with you in mind. And that was challenging for me in a lot of ways because I guess it speaks to one's values as well, because I could see some of the unfairness and the injustice in that. And it made me committed in a lot of ways to think that, if I had any influence to change things, that I would do that. So I think those are all of the things that helped sustain me when times got difficult. I saw my mum deal with things that I will never have to deal with, I'm pretty sure. And somehow she kept going. She was resilient. Resilience isn't always something that serves us, but we learn these things. And, she is of that generation where you had to put up with overt racism, you had to put up with overt sexism, and she always had a game plan and respected everyone but feared no one. So I think I try my best to honour that in her and hold on to those things.
So she was a great coach and mentor for you. And you were investing in yourself. Were there any other experiences of coaching, being coached or mentored that helped shape your path on your journey?
Without a doubt, even though I didn't realize all of them at the time. And just to go back to my mother, not only was she that great coach and mentor to me, it was to the entire community. And so I learned a lot about service. You know, my house, I grew up in a house where if people weren't able to stay at home for whatever reason, they'd fallen out with their parents, it was our house they came to. There was always food on the table for anyone who turned up. Wasn't great for me sometimes. There was hardly any space for me sometimes, but I just learned to admire that so much. And watching my mum lead other people is something that I picked up on. So your mum's your mum. You don't tend to think about them as a mentor in quite that way, but she was my greatest teacher. When I started out at work, I would say no, I didn't officially see anyone that I would describe as a mentor in that way that I was conscious of. But when I went into teaching, when I started working in the FE college, there were a couple of things that happened. And one of them was through networking. And there was a network at the time that was called the Network for Black Professionals. And the whole point of that organisation was to address the underrepresentation of people in the FE sector. And so I think there are only, at the time, I think there were two principals when I started, and something like about 350, perhaps even more, further education colleges. Only two of them were what we would call now global majority backgrounds. And so that network was working with everyone in the sector, the stakeholders, the people of influence, to ensure that change came about. Part of that was providing formal mentor opportunities for staff working in colleges. And I think that's why this is a pivotal moment for me, because I was able to access mentoring from people in senior roles who were working in further education. I worked with a woman actually who themselves, I wanted a parent to mentor me because I had young children at the time. And so I was matched with a senior leader, a woman, Asian background, who was a parent who had a senior role in the professional services side of things. And that was, again, really instructional for me, but also it made me feel more positive. I wanted to find out, how do you do it? Because I was very bogged down with, like many of us, working really, 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 really hard. If I work hard, the spoils will come. And it's not quite as straightforward as that, as we know. So having access to a mentor was really important, because suddenly someone was telling me I was worth that. And that wasn't a message I'd got despite all this hard work. And then just having the opportunity to connect with people who may have some similarities, but were very different to me. So some of the mentors that I've had have been male, they have been white European backgrounds, learning from them. And one of my managers was a huge mentor and sponsor of me. So those things taught me a lot about the fact that you don't lead alone, and about the fact that it's really important to get your networking game up, whatever that looks like for you. It doesn't have to be Machiavellian. In fact, it's imperative, because, as I say, you don't lead alone, and followership requires that you connect with others. And I was quite a shy child, believe it or not, but also I was one of those people that networking, children, no time, wasn't feeling it. I'd much rather let my work speak for itself, which it didn't, not loudly enough. So yeah, that brought lots of people who would mentor, coach, sponsor, not with those official titles, but I can look back now and recognize those behaviors.
It's interesting as you were saying that. I was also thinking along my career journey. I also had an education journey teaching as well, and who had mentored, helped me understand certain things, or opened a door that helped me through to the next stage of what I was doing. And it's very interesting when you really recount that it was a variety of people at different stages that impacted in that way.
It's without a doubt. And in my own training, when I am working with organizations on sponsorship, for example, I will ask them to think about those moments in their career, 2 or 3 pivotal moments, and get them to think about who helped them. It's just a simple question: who helped you? Because yes, merit is important, but again, the idea that meritocracy alone will get everybody to where their talent suggests they should be is not the reality for a lot of people. And I think it's important just to reflect back on the people who have helped you. And it's funny, as you're saying it, I'm thinking back to before I got into teaching, and I got into teaching when I had children because I needed something that was a bit more stable. I had a background in marketing. I said I was a marketing graduate, and I worked for an advertising agency for a while. And I can remember going for my job there. I'd just come to London. I was a teenager, and I wanted this job in this fancy pants advertising agency. And, advertising was all the rage at the time. And I remember the manager of the department not being sure about me, not wanting to employ me and saying, I'm not sure about you. And his number 2 said, yeah, I want her. She didn't explain it. Different to me, different background to me. Didn't explain it. Just said, yeah, no, she'll be fine. And vouched for me. And I didn't connect that at the time to say, okay, that's advocacy there. That's someone stepping in and staking their reputation on me. But it's remained with me as a really, really significant moment.
Yeah, that's very powerful. That's very powerful. Because that's the open door, isn't it? That's the first door that opened.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I haven't forgotten it.
So we were talking about your first mentor and how they were in a leadership position, also a parent, so you could align there and get that sort of experience as well. But what misconceptions about leadership do you believe that still hold women back today? And how do you challenge them in the work that you do?
Interesting. So who's doing the holding, I guess, is my curiosity around that. Often we start with women holding themselves back, and I appreciate that question. And sometimes women internalize those things. I am holding myself back. I absolutely agree that there are things on the inside that we all need to work with. There's always that inner work that those of us who have self-doubt and lack the confidence, and even myself as a child, as I said, I was a shy child. There was absolutely inner work that I needed to do, but that had nothing to do with my ability as a leader. So whilst I was feeling all of those things, I was still captain of the netball team and captain of the rounders team and showing leadership. I went to church at the time. All of those talents were there, and they were being seen in some spaces because I'd been appointed captain, clearly, but not in other spaces. Or what was happening is sometimes that was being questioned, and it would be questioned when I went to a grammar school. So again, the culture in that space was that people like me don't lead. And so I think those misconceptions that we've resolved a lot of the problems around leadership because it's a numbers game in that sense, and there are more women in the workplace and there are more women proportionately, leads us to believe that a lot of some of those historical problems have been resolved now. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions. Women are still having a really hard time of it. And we see this debate playing out all over the place. There's also a misconception around the fact that we don't need to think intersectionally. And again, the more aspects to identity that you have, and I work with women of colour particularly, so the gains that have been made in terms of gender equity are not distributed evenly. And so I think there's a real misconception that when women make some gains, all women benefit from that. And the reality and the evidence base shows that that's not always the case. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. I am very curious as to how the narrative around imposter syndrome is playing out. And again, I think what is problematic is that sometimes it's pulling us away from some of those organizational and some of those systemic barriers that still are in place for people. So as I said before, yes, there are lots of people who may be questioning their ability, may not think they're good enough. It shows up a lot in the neurodiversity space. But is that the chicken or is that the egg? Are you questioning yourself because you've been told that you're not good enough, you don't belong in this space? You just need to get your confidence up a little bit more, Jannett, and then you'll make it there. What might that look like if somebody said, yeah, you're ready, Jannett, come on, step up, I've got you covered here, don't worry. If there is a mistake, I'm going to stake my reputation on you because I believe in you. What would that do for people's confidence? So I think there's so much more work to be done in that regard.
Thank you for that. And as you were talking, you're mentioning the neurodiversity space, as you were talking about in education and in the workplace as well. And maybe this next question has some sort of element of that, because that's a journey that I want us to go on as well. But that inner work, you were talking about inner strength and inner work. How has that proved more valuable, say, than qualifications?
In my own case?
Yes.
Well, I love that question because I had to learn that, because for my generation, and it still continues to this day, if you are from an underrepresented, marginalized group, the rules tell you that you have to be overqualified. You have to be, the saying is, twice as hard to be seen as half as good. That means qualifications. That means getting that piece of paper. And many of us have internalized that. So in order to flip that, and that's where coaching, that is where mentoring, that is where leadership development is so important, in a psychologically safe space so that you can unpack that. These are stories, because they're stories. That's what we're talking about. These stories that have come through to us. Work twice as hard, get your piece of paper. Many of my peers whose parents have come from the Caribbean, in my case, that's the message, that's the story that they brought with them. And that's what they imparted on their children. And that's what many of us did, and then got very confused. I've got this piece of paper now, there's still a problem. And you work in education, I've worked in higher education. You don't see any more qualifications there, but you still see some of the same issues coming up in those spaces. So part of that inner work is to actually set aside those rules and home in on who you are. Understand how that has interacted with your own sense of identity. If you are in a space where you are one of the few, if there aren't many people in positions of power who look like you, it's important that you tap into your strengths. What are you good at? What do you bring to the party? Often when you're different, what you bring is a different way of solving problems. And that is what organizations need more than anything else. And it's often what they say they want, but the good intention doesn't always follow through to implementation. So the work becomes around celebrating the difference that you have, the difference that more difference makes, while seeing what are the connections, what are the things that we have in common on a human level in terms of our values, what are some of those shared things, but in a way that I still bring with me my difference that I love and I celebrate.
That difference, that's resonating with me, that word difference, because that word difference is so rich and it brings so much more to the table. How does difference work when we're talking about neurodiversity?
Big time. Big time. And again, I say this with the caveat that we have to think about this in a nuanced way, because the story and the rhetoric is we want people who are cognitively different now. We welcome this, we embrace this. The reality of what I see is, yes, there are some organizations doing some great work and really trying to be neuro inclusive, but we still see people who are struggling in the workplace, who are not thriving, whose ideas are not being received, whose ways of working are being challenged in a punitive way because it's not the way the rest of us work. And I can say that as a so-called neurotypical person because I'm that person. The beauty of my work is because I work with people who think differently, I find myself having to stop and be curious and be patient with myself. Not be patient with the other person, but be patient with myself and listen and hear. So going deeper than Steve Jobs and Apple, and that's why we have our iPhones, going deeper. And what does it really mean every day, day in, day out, to work with someone who will just say something that may throw you? But if you lean into it, you get so many new insights and new perspectives and different ways of solving things. Do you need to have meetings that go on forever and ever and ever? Do you need lots of pieces of paper that are floating around the place? Can you think about what you do beforehand to ensure that everybody participates fully in the meeting? Can you tear up the script and work with people who don't use a script because to use a script would not work within their learning style? So they're just able to, in the moment, get to it. Can you do that? The privilege that I've had is because I work around that all the time, and I'm the co-founder of a community interest company, and all of our volunteers are neurodivergent. I, in that sense, am the minority thinker. And that's the most wonderful thing. It's been the greatest teacher. My son has taught me things because he doesn't think like me. So that is not to say that it doesn't require work. As I've said, I talk about the neuro romance, where people get all into having conversations around superpowers. For some people, they absolutely see their neurodivergence as a superpower. And I know many people who see it in that way. I know just as many people who would say that that is problematic for them. And so how do we unpack some of these stories? And if it is a superpower, how do we create organizations, institutions where people can leverage that superpower so that they benefit, but also the organization and society benefits? So that difference and working with difference, the good intention is there, but you know, at chalk face, many people are still struggling. And as a coach, I'm often brought in when things have gone wrong. There is some type of performance issue that's going on there. It might even be worse than that. And then we get the intersection with mental health. And so there's often an intersection with people who are struggling with anxiety, perhaps depression. Now, is that because they have anxiety and depression, or is it because they are not able to feel included in the workplace and there were just work practices that are not going to work for them?
Thank you so much, Jannett, for such a plethora of ideas and concepts that we should all take on board as we navigate workplaces and just normal life, because embracing difference means to be more creative and innovative as well. So is there one positive takeaway that you can leave with our audience today?
I would always say to people, be curious. Curiosity is one of the greatest leadership skills that you can have, and there are many. It opens up a world to so many things. It would be easy. I'm going to use neurodiversity again, and this is what's come up in the book. You know, it would be easy just to dismiss things because you're not curious about it. It would be easy to make conclusions around what neurodiversity is, what dyslexia is, because you make assumptions based on generalities. And so all neurodivergent people are the same. All people with dyslexia are the same. Curiosity means that you find out, how are you when you're working at your best? What is it that is going to get in the way of you being able to show up with your ideas in that meeting? What might we do differently? What questions haven't we asked? Oh, I've noticed that Jane hasn't asked that question in the meeting. They don't like to have their camera on. Is it that they're being disrespectful, or is it that they're experiencing cognitive overload? And actually, Jane will contribute even more if we just go with the fact that that camera's off and we tune into what it is that they're saying. So I would always encourage that. I would always encourage to do things that are different, step out of what is called your comfort zone. I often find myself pulled into those places, but the value is that my work is so much richer. What I do and what I bring is so much richer when I'm coaching clients. I invest the time and energy in that. So it may not look like a traditional coaching session because we all think differently and in non-traditional ways. So I think the beauty of all of that, staying open to the beauty of all of that, whilst being pragmatic and realistic and doing what you need to do, the learning, the professional development, if that's the case, to ensure that you can do it well and ethically is important. But the fun and the joy of all of that, you will never regret.
Thank you, Jannett. Thank you so much for your thoughts today on neurodiversity and how difference is something that we should all embrace because it enriches our lives and it helps us all to go deeper. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.